Okay. I'm ready. Are you? I think I can do this. Let me see if I could do full screen here. That's not enough. Let's go. Bam. That worked. Kind of. Okay. Jason, I'm gonna play this. Let me just play it. All right, here you go.
Dying in a hospital is not what's natural. That's not what's soft. In these kind of moments, you need softness. It can take dying to figure out what living is actually like. I spent my life filling my heart with beauty, with nature, with connection. So I choose to fill my final moments with the same. Last breaths are sacred. When I imagine my final days, I see music. I see the ocean. I see cheesecake. Even now, as I seek help to end my life, with all the pain, and in these final moments, there is still so much beauty. You just have to be brave enough to see it. And seeing the rhythms of what's going to keep going after I'm gone bring a lot of comfort.
Spelled her name wrong. What are they advertising?
Yeah, that is the question. What are they advertising, Jason?
This is why it's important to read sci-fi, because that is straight out of a sci-fi novel. I mean, that's like a here's what's wrong with the world sci-fi novel.
Where
the government's trying to convince you that it's a good thing that they are killing you, so you volunteer to walk into the gas chamber.
That is a Canadian company, Simon's, fashion designers and all that.
Okay.
And so they put together this ad for Jennifer, I guess. And it's assisted suicide ad. So here's what's crazy. Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Do they offer assisted suicide services?
No. They
are promoting. That's crazy.
Okay, so check this out. This happens at the same time in Canada. So that's going on in. Okay, I'll get to this in a second. So then there's this veteran in Canada who is trying to get a lift for her house and she's going back and forth with Canadian government on this lift. And she asked him, hey, can I get, and she's having a hard time. And I think one of the guys who's working with her says, well, we can offer you MAID, which is a medical assisted death, as an alternative, since this is such a problem. That's also an option for you. And so he offered this to her.
Because they don't want to pay for it.
Well, to be fair, Justin Trudeau condemned this, and assisted death is usually only given to people who have imminent death, or who those are suffering and could possibly die from their suffering. So it is looked at as a kindness. My only thought, not only, there's a couple thoughts I have. One of them, Jason, is that there are no reins to this. Once you open,
there's no brakes on that.
Why can't he offer her that option if it is a reality that, hey, this is a problem for you, isn't it? Like, this is like, you might not come out of this okay. And you know what? It is expensive to get this in. It's going to cost a lot of money. You know what? Why don't you consider, now we're not forcing you. Why don't you consider, a cheaper option in all of this, right? And help us all in helping you. And then you don't have to deal with this. And those stairs won't ever be a hassle for you ever again. And so here's my only thought. I'll kick it to you. And this wasn't where I wanted to spend our whole conversation, but I think it's important when worldviews have made their way into your design of clothing and the art in which it wants to portray arts period, you've lost. It doesn't even have to get to the point where they got people doing it yet. They do, because this lady decided to kill herself, assisted suicide, and everybody's having a party around it to try and make something really, really beautiful that's not at all. Right. And so
I don't know if you noticed,
bunch of women, not guys,
but a bunch of women. And I mean, it is Canada, but it's also a bunch of white people too. I don't think you're seeing this in black neighborhoods.
Look, when I've always said there's a couple things to know when black people really kind of have, like, you don't have any more problems. One of them is when they start shooting up schools and doing like public shootings. It's like, we ain't got time for that. We got so many other things to deal with. We ain't running around here trying to shoot up everything except for our own hood. You know what I mean? That's the only thing that we probably gonna shoot up. But whenever we have that, or whenever you have, black people like, you know what, I just want to kill myself. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, you've arrived. There's no more oppression that you have to deal with ever anywhere in this world. Whenever you got those two things running for you, you want to run around, start shooting up schools. Because out of all the fights that we had in school and all the stuff that we had to go through at school and the community, one of the things we didn't do was walk up in our school and just start shooting people because they was talking about us. We might fight them. We might do that. But when you start doing that, you didn't reach white status. Like, all right, you know what? You got to the point where you're on all these medications and you need to go shoot up a school. You have reached white status. That you're there. You're a full American, all in. There's nothing that's off regards to you anymore. And then when you go around and start just like, you know what, I'm gonna go to a mall and just start shooting up everybody. I'm gonna go to Walmart and just start shooting up everybody. It's like, well, you know what? You can take yourself off the oppressed list. That's not you anymore.
Right. One, I think it's that. I think you start talking about like oppression gives you a weird spot. It gives you a spot in the world, even if it's a bad spot, right? You know where you sit, and I think that's one of the reasons so many people are trying to claim oppression right now, is because then they're not floating along disconnected from reality. They know where they fit into the order of things, even if it's not the place that they want. That ad basically says, look, when you're honest, you don't have a spot in this world. You don't fit anywhere. Right. So she says, I've filled my heart with beauty. I've filled my, right. That's what you say if it didn't work. Right? Because you're abstracting beauty as if it's I've filled my heart with nature. Right? That's what it sounds like to have failed to find a place in the world, right?
Because
And so
beauty
now
doesn't
you're
do
like,
that.
yeah, beauty doesn't do that. And you don't, if you like um the I know we plan on talking about Milton a little bit. Milton specifically talks about um, how beauty connects you to something that's beautiful, and then the connection to that thing. Right? It's not the beauty in abstract. Beauty is the means by which Adam connected with Eve, and discovered actually something deeper than the beauty. Right? But if you try to abstract the
Ah,
beauty into a thing that you connect with directly,
yes, ma'am.
it's like licking the door rather than walking through it into the house, right? So
Can I
like,
just
oh, look at that door. It's that could get me in, that could get me into a place, and then sitting there hugging the door the whole time
oh,
and
the
never
door
going
is
into
so
the
good.
house.
I love the
Yeah,
door. The door is great. Love, the when you talked about being connected, I was talking to my oldest daughter. She's 15, and we were talking about, my wife and I were sitting down. You got to talk, man. You got to talk to your kids.
yeah,
If people don't talk to their kids, they really, I mean, especially if, I don't think you should be sending your kids to government school, but if you're sending your kids away from you, um, to any school, Christian, I don't care what it is, you need to be talking to your kids.
yeah,
The school is not a supplement for family. People have to really, really remember that in every way. And I think it's easy for us to do that because we know that they have good foundations. They have the good direction that they're going with the school. We believe, we're grateful for that. But then we neglect to do our parently duty with our kids and parent our kids. We think we let the school still parent
right,
our kids, even though we send them to Christian schools. But I was talking with my daughter. We always, dinner time is kind of our family worship time. That whole setup is really, really rich for us. And we were talking about how her generation experiences music. And it was fascinating because I hadn't really paid much attention to it. When you and I were growing up, Jason, we could not experience music by ourselves. It wasn't something
right,
that we did. We went and got an album, or we got a cassette tape, or we got, Walkmans were kind of the real revolutionary thing that allowed you to experience music by yourself. It was, you didn't have music was on records. You experienced it with people. It was loud, auditory. So you had to have speakers in a room and an environment to experience music. And when you experienced it, you didn't just hear it in your headset with
yeah,
vibrations in your head. You felt them through the speakers and auditory sense in a room. So it bounced off the room, it bounced off of people, and emotions were generated in that room with other people. When you went and got the new, whatever record you were listening to, is just a new, Destiny Child's album, or it was a new Boys to Men,
yeah,
and you would play that with your friends, and you guys together would have this experience with people in the room and the real feeling of the music coming out the speakers. And my daughter was talking about that their generation now experiences music separate from each other with
yeah,
headphones on, and then tries to communicate how that felt without actually being in relationship with each other and with the music. And it was
yeah,
fascinating to me because I said, oh my goodness, these people aren't connected, not in a physical way. They're connected cerebrally. Right.
right, yeah,
And my wife started talking about this, and she was like, the way that they connect now is through people discipling them about how they're supposed to feel. And the way that we see that is through reaction videos. I'm going to go
yeah,
outside in the snow with no clothes on. How's it going to make me feel? And so they're watching a reaction video about how you're supposed to feel when you go outside in the snow, or when you get a package or something. And so they're discipling them. How are you supposed to feel? And they're experiencing this separate from people, and being discipled how to feel about it. So they have no original feelings on anything.
right.
They're told how they're supposed to feel. They're told how they're supposed to, and there's no connectedness with this. And
even there's not even like my family used to Sunday night sit down and watch the Cosby Show, the Wide
right,
World of Disney, where you couldn't go to, and I remember asking for a TV for my room and my parents laughing, right? They're like, that's not how you do TV, right?
Right.
TV is
Yeah.
something we do together, right?
Right.
And
Right.
like it wasn't ever, and I had some friends that got TVs in their room, and my parents were right. Like it wasn't good. It wasn't a good
Yeah.
thing to end up all by yourself in your room all the time. But we have, it just, that's just the way you do it now. I mean, even, Stranger Things, which was a mass phenomenon, was not something that people watched together. It was something everybody
Right.
watched and then talked about. I remember my family watching In Living Color together. My family watching America's Funniest Home Videos together, right? We would sit and watch stuff. I mean, probably
Together.
Yeah, together. And it was probably we probably watched too much TV, but we always did it together. There wasn't multiple TVs to go to split off into. So I think there's a move away from community that the church should just be resisting, right? But resisting by making it hard to avoid enjoying one another, right? By like having a consistent fellowship, consistent fellowship on purpose.
Well,
Even like Sunday school, right? Like Sunday schools, it's one of those things where that becomes a little community. It becomes something important in people's lives, because they come and they do it together week in and week out. And we need to just we need to be a place where the neighborhood can be rebirthed out of, because we teach people how to be neighbors, because the neighborhoods are all broken down, and they're not functioning the way they should.
It's because the families aren't.
The families aren't.
Families not.
So, but that's something that the church has done with all sorts of institutions throughout history, right? The institution breaks down, the church rebuilds people that can go out and rebuild those institutions, and it sort of rebirths the institution into the world out of itself. It's done it with a lot of different institutions.
I don't think that should
like
be
when
lost.
like the Roman Empire when the Roman Empire fell, in London, all of a sudden all the judges walked away because there was no paycheck coming. So they went to find out, hey, why didn't my paycheck show up? And then they never came back. And so all of a sudden, the only institution standing that could give justice was the church. And so it did that for a little bit until it could rebirth judges back into the world, right? So the civil magistrate.
Isn't that where we got robes from? Like that's how we knew that they would make the pastors or the elders wear robes out in public so that they could adjudicate a case. And that's how we were able to identify a judge in society.
Well, yeah, it was the robe of authority, where it was like, you have this robe of authority over here, but then there's nobody to put in it, because the people that could rightfully wear it were all gone. There was another robe of authority, right? There was a public authority in the church, and so they said, "Will you do it?" And they said, "Yeah, we'll do it." And you had pastors that were well versed in the law and ready to do it, and that's why you've got the minister of justice, the minister, that you've got the overlap in terminology, because pastors and judges both wore robes in the ancient world, and in the medieval world, in the early medieval world. But the terminology of public minister, you see that in all sorts of, it's still in the names that we give to different offices. They're ministry offices. You've got ecclesiastical offices that are names given to civic offices for that reason.
So I want to go back to this connectedness for a second. When I was talking to my wife and talking to my daughter, and we were working through this, the thought hit me. We were talking about music, just the experience of music and art,
Yeah.
and I realized that my daughter hadn't heard certain albums yet that I am living through, experiencing and talking, having a conversation about that she hasn't been introduced to. And so I'm like, I need to introduce you to these artists and we need to have this experience right now. And I was telling her, like, the way that we used to get around music was we would go grab our CD and everybody would jump in the car
Yeah.
so that we could
Yeah.
have
Oh,
this
yeah.
listening experience, right? And especially if you were a music producer, you were producing music at the time, you would mix in your studio and everything would sound great there. But then you had one true test. You had to put it in the vehicle because that was going to tell you whether or not your stuff smacked or not. And if it didn't smack in the car, you knew you weren't going to have a hit on your hand because that's where people would gather around to listen to music, was in their vehicle. That's where they spent most of their time at, was in their vehicle. And so, and the other place was like the sound system at home. And it hit me, you can't get a home sound system in stores now. You go to a store, you go to Walmart, you go to Target, and they have these little dinky speakers with no body, and they have these Apple speakers and these Sonos, and they're just kind of like speakers that disappear in the room, and they're just some sort of sound that comes from places, but nothing that like rocks the house, nothing that, we had the kind of speakers that were the size of your head, they would stand up from the floor to the ceiling. It had huge house sound systems, right?
I inherited my dad's old speakers too, which were big, and they were from the late 60s, and they were the ones that lasted forever, and they sounded warm and amazing. And they had a mid-range that nothing you could get at the time had, because everything was made of plastic. They were old wood,
Right.
all wood and metal speakers.
Yeah.
And then the garage roof collapsed onto them and crushed them, unfortunately, in a big snowstorm back in 2008. Yeah, the devil's like, we can't have these. But the fact that you had speakers that you could pass down to your kids, that's not even a thing anymore. So we went and got we have a television, but not up in the main part of the house. But we went and got a television surround sound system to play music with for the family, because you can't get just so
they don't exist.
It's good. Yeah, they don't exist, but that can play loud enough that you can't talk during the music, which is the goal when we're doing.
Well, the goal
because we put music on when we do the dishes every night. We put music on. We have like a dishes playlist, and it almost always breaks down into one of the kids standing on the furniture singing and the rest of them dancing around, like every it's. And when one daughter, who shall not be named, comes home from college, she's the one who basically rounds everybody up, and it becomes like a little rock opera in the living room. And the dishes, it takes a long time for the dishes to get done, but I don't care, because because my kids are enjoying one another, and they're when you say it's time for the dishes, they go, all right. And then Apple Bottom Jeans comes on, and they're like, let's go.
Boots with the
That's the first song. That's the first song on our dishes playlist. So they love it.
We'll talk about that later. We've listened to that song from I can't remember. There's a remake of that song for like the Furries or something like that, like one of the films. And it's like, that's the one I'll let you listen to. But my whole point of bringing that up is that the way that we even experience things, the way that we even engage things are so different. I feel like I'm understanding C.S. Lewis a lot more with his lack of enjoyment for vehicles.
Yeah.
Right. So, you think about, and the reason I'm thinking about this is because this is going to sound weird, but I'm going to turn it here. I think the modernization of everything has created in us a desire for more of a communistic attitude than more of a free man, free market attitude. Okay. And I know it sounds like a stretch, but let me try and get here. before, in the old world, you would never urbanize yourself. That was asking for a death penalty. You would never go and be in a real urbanized area, because if your limitation, and this is all dealing with transportation and C.S. Lewis' view on transportation, this was just part of it that I've observed. This is not all of his argument. It's just what I've observed from his argument. Because of the urbanization of everything, you had to live off the land, right? And if you couldn't supply New York with enough land around it to feed all those people there, people are going to die. You know, the goods and services that in the surrounding area, to have this many people in this area without enough land and materials to feed, take care, and nurture, heat, and all that, those people, you're not going to make it. So what you have to do is you have to find a plot of land, a group of people, smaller cities that can sustain that environment, because you don't have import and export. There is no transportation. There is nothing that you're getting from China. There is nothing that you're getting from South Africa and from Guatemala. You're not getting those goods and services at such a high rate because it takes so long for them to get there. So you have to actually be self-sustaining. And so up until the point of transportation, when we started to move things at such a high rate, I mean, the things that we move now on these massive ships with these containers constantly back and forth allows for a certain type of urbanization that we would have never seen in the old world, which means, and this is how I get to the communist part of this, or control of communism in one sense, which means that if you are expecting all of, or a large part of your goods and services to come from import and export, and not from you being able to sustain yourself from where you're at, that means that all someone has to do is to shut off your import export, or to control it from some economic structure that is more difficult to you, and then you're done. And you're done. There's no way for you to control that. And we saw some of this with COVID. Is our supply chains have not even recovered from the short period in which they were fractured. It's very sensitive, and yet it's very impactful. But the only reason we're able to have such large cities and this huge form of urbanization is because of the import-export, and not because of the things that we are able to sustain from the environment that we're at. Now, I'm thanking God for all of it. But what happens is you're able to be manipulated when everything that you get comes from this source over here. And so China is able to talk to other businesses and others in states and countries and say, hey, if you don't do this, we don't like this, you don't get that. And so there's a certain sort of bargaining chip that happens that moves you from your principles, because you need this in order to survive as a nation, as a city, as a state. You need those things. And so there is this point of independence that you don't have anymore, that you don't even understand anymore, that you're not even, that you take completely for granted. And so you're able to be manipulated because of it.
And I think this is why you see, when you have like an influencer start getting into the idea of self-sufficiency, they get canceled so quickly. Right? Because self-sufficiency is terrifying in this sort of environment, right? Like if the need to say, it's my job to provide, I gotta figure it out. That's scary in an urban environment, when you're not used to being able to say, like, look, if I get the seeds and put them in the ground, they'll come up. Right. But it's not like that when you're the 7th, 8th floor in a high-rise apartment building, where you can just say, well, look, worst comes to worst, I can go out and gather mushrooms, or I can go out and hunt or something.
Right.
When you know that's not the case, you need a system that you can rely on, and it makes you easy to manipulate if in that setting, because somebody comes in and says, here's the system is failing you. Now it does sometimes, right? The system does sometimes fail, but it's also easy to say the system has failed you and I will provide a better system. And when people are afraid, or when people, this is one of the things that Thomas Chalmers did. He was a Scottish minister he wrote a really great book called The Expulsive Power of a New Affection. He went Yeah, it's
George
a
Grant's one of
fantastic book.
favorites.
Yeah,
George Grant
yeah,
loves
yeah.
Chalmers. Yeah.
But one of the things that Chalmers did was he went into a major urban area and began preaching the gospel. And what he realized was these folks have been separated from the ability to provide for themselves. But as they were becoming Christians, they were starting to say, "Oh, but I've got a responsibility. What can I do?" And their church developed a whole way to help people build garden boxes for their apartments and build the ability to grow some food again, but also grow flowers and kind of reconnect with their own with their self dignity by giving them even a way to work what little thing they had to work it productively, right? So they began providing wood and helping people build garden boxes, bringing soil to the people living in the apartment complexes so that they could have their own to start little gardens outside for them to it was a way of saying you still have the dignity of Adam. You even though you live in an apartment and are in the middle of an urban area and you're struggling to get by, you actually objectively still have the dignity of Adam, and let us help you rediscover it, right? So their ministry, their evangelistic ministry was incredibly effective, but a big part of it was insisting that these people that were being treated without dignity by the companies, by the factories, that they were going to get treated with dignity at church. And so people would they were ready to be, they were attracted to a church that said, look, you do have dignity. Factory work is hard, but you're not replaceable, expendable. You actually do eat. A factory doesn't mean you're a cog. And so it was a really, and it was actually George Grant's lecture series on Thomas Chalmers that where I found all of this stuff, and when got the works of Chalmers. They're really fun to read.
The works of Chalmers. See, you always do this. Yeah. Every show I got to go buy some more books.
He actually, so one of the things that he would do, this is what I find, this is one of the things that fascinates me about Chalmers, as he started teaching just free university level classes. So teaching anybody who wanted to read. So a lot of adults, that was one of the things that rural folks tended to know how to read. One of the things that was lost in urbanization was literacy, because you were separated from your parents, grandparents, and the family libraries, the neighbors that had books.
Hold on. Wait, that doesn't seem right. It would seem like in an urbanization, these things would be more common than less common.
They are now, but it was because Christians started realizing, oh man, you don't have a family library. We better start city libraries. We better start church libraries. We better make sure that books are available. And so literacy, there was a huge push to get the early 1900s. There was a big push to get the cities literate again. So because it was like a 98% literacy rate in America before urbanization.
Wait, what?
We still haven't recovered it. Yeah, we still haven't gotten back to the literacy rates, pre-urbanization literacy rates. So
the way that they talk about this and the way that they make you think is that people are just now becoming more literate
for the first time in history.
For the first time in American history.
It's like them coming along and saying, we're going to start giving you a 2-day weekend in the history of the world. Nobody's ever had that. And then you read about the Middle Ages and you realize they only work 200 days a year because they had so many days off to celebrate the church calendar, right? So that they worked far less total hours in the year than we do.
Hey, Jason, can we do? You talked about this last. You just brought up something. I just want to make sure I want to put like a check mark around it and circle this. Can we talk about church calendar? We've like
Yeah, I would
that'd be
love to.
really.
I'm
Let's.
super passionate about the church calendar and would love to. So,
I
and because I
go
think it's
ahead.
freedom. The church calendar is what is it is the gift for free people, for a free people, to have multiple calendars that are layered on top of one another. Right. So because they always had a civic calendar also, right? And we have a civic calendar, but our civic calendar is our only calendar. Right. And so to have a civic calendar and then laid on top of your civic calendar, a church calendar, and be able to say, like, I know that the civic calendar doesn't give me a day off here, but I'm taking one anyway because I'm free. And the church calendar, it says I should take a day off to celebrate here. Because right now, if the civil government tried to take Christmas off the calendar, a lot of people would go along with it. Banks would just say, well, we got to stay open. It's not a bank holiday anymore because the government gives us bank holidays, right? That that would happen if they tried to take Christmas away. A lot of Christians even would say, well, Romans 13 tells us that we got to go back.
They've legalized gay marriage. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, of course they would.
Yeah. So, but when that happens, a free people says, but I've got other calendars. The government's calendar is not my only calendar. I'm not.
This was your problem with Juneteenth. That was your issue with Juneteenth.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, right? This is why I was like, kick the government in the crotch and ignore them. They don't give you Juneteenth. That's right. What you're a free people. Yeah. We celebrate when we want to celebrate. We take the days off we want to take off. We're a free people. We are not people that wait around for the government to give us holidays. Damn it.
Yeah. Say that.
It makes me so mad.
You were talking about I don't want to interrupt your thought. Were you going to finish anything on that? Okay.
Well, no, just I think that there's the church calendar is a dignity giving is one of the dignity giving gifts that the church has said, hey, the government, you are a free people. Here is a whole nother calendar that is voluntary, right? That it's a voluntary calendar. You get to pick the days you want. And at the height of the Middle Ages, when the church was most powerful, people were incredibly free, right? To work or not work, take days off, work extra, work less. They would have days off where everybody would gather at the church and just work on the construction of the building. And they're not getting paid for that. They have a giant picnic. Everybody brings food and everybody works on the church building, and everybody in town takes the day off in order to go work on the church building, which is part of the spiritual inheritance of their people. It's a different mindset. It's a freedom loving mindset that we're so far from because we don't have a cosmology in which freedom has a place, in which freedom is a blessing. Freedom is a good thing.
Only slavery.
Yes. Well, I mean, think of if you had in physics, a free radical is a problem. That's what causes cancer, right? A free radical is in a mechanistic universe. A free radical is destructive, only destructive, right? In an organic or a spiritual understanding of the cosmos, the freedom for a seed to blow means more life, right? The seed that blows over the fence, it means that the other side of the fence is going to have more life as well. But in physics or in machines, freedom is a curse. And that's why Nietzsche said, all you've got to do is change the cosmology and people will find atheism on their own. And that's what you had. I mean, that's the reason Marxism was so attractive, was the cosmology had already shifted and changed into a physics-based mechanistic understanding of the universe.
Well, and you see that argument, and this is kind of where I wanted to go today, that argument of freedom being a curse, I think contributed to the workers unions and that whole time, early 20s 40s era, that within that area, especially what we're going to talk about today with in the 40s with Walt Disney, because of the freedom of companies and their ability to not have any regulations, they oppressed a lot of people, treated people unfairly, and so all of that freedom was needed to be cinched a little bit with workers unions and a group of people to organize around putting pressure against their companies because they were being mistreated. And so you saw communists find this discrepancy between workers and their bosses and said, hey, we can use this to capitalize, because we can't take over America. It's not working.
Right.
Communism isn't working fast enough or hard enough to take over America. But if we can get in there and take this animosity between workers and their bosses, we can actually get the kind of culture we want to grow there in America. And so what they started to do, and you see this in the story of Walt Disney, we talked a little bit about this before, but you see them coming in to Disney through these worker unions, not just Disney, but all of America was through these unions. And what was the guy's name? Herbert K. Sorrell, was it? That was the union leader, I think, that was kind of fighting with Walt at the time. I think that's what his name was.
Yeah, I think so.
And he's able to get a handle on, or try to get a handle on Disney through the employees. And it seemed like Walt was willing to let them unionize there until one of the employees came to him and said, hey, I don't think this is going to be good for us. We need you to stand up and to make a vote so that you can see that we don't all want to do this. But because they had a small fraction that was speaking up, Walt's like, okay. And he had to be careful what he could say, couldn't say about wages and stuff to this individual, but he at least had a vote. And when he put it to vote, he realized that the majority of his employees really didn't want that. And there was a small fraction. I think, what was it? A small faction. What was it, about 300 people, I think, out of the 1,200, 1,300 employees?
Because he wasn't mistreating his employees.
Right. He wasn't. That was the thing.
Yeah.
It was jealousy. Right.
Right.
He would.
Well, and it was actually that particular union was actually a communist front too. Right. So, and a lot of the people were like, no, do you understand what's behind this? And he didn't originally, because he was the kind of guy that was like, well, if I'm not paying my employees enough to support,
I want to treat them well. Yeah.
I want to treat them well. Right. So if that's what's going on, then hey, let's talk about it. And then when his employees came and said, do you understand what's going on? What's at stake? This is going to wreck what we've got. And it's going well. And it's a communist front. And he didn't, when he looked into it, he was like, whoa. And then found out that that was going on everywhere in Hollywood. It wasn't just at Disney, but that communism was, the communists were explicitly going after the media. And Disney was one of the most popular, influential media moguls at the time. You didn't have the same kind of major mogul medias that you do now, but
why was Disney important?
Because it was telling the stories of the kids.
So I think I'm trying to remember his Yuri Bezmenov. You know who that guy is? Have you heard about him yet?
Yeah.
He defected from the KGB. He was somewhat of a journalist. He worked for the KGB in 1984 or 87. He does this interview and he says, listen, the KGB they have this idea called ideological subversion. It's their form of Cold War, because they can't take over everything through a hot war. It doesn't work. You don't get the kind of thing that you want. So they go to warfare on your ideology. And in ideological subversion, it has 4 parts to it. The first part is demoralize. Right. And so, and he not demoralizing, like make you feel bad. No. Completely
Yeah.
destroy your moral foundations and background of
Right.
what you hold to. And one of the things, the way they do this is they spend time in education, in storytelling. He's like, they just want to pick apart the things that hold together your foundational American culture, which is mainly Christian. And they want to use stories and other forms of entertainment to take away and pick at the moral foundation, not completely destroy, but to say,
Yeah.
is there anything wrong with, your dad looking at porn? Is there anything wrong with your dad, holding hands with another woman, going on dates? It's kind of bad. Oh, no. And then eventually,
Yeah.
is there anything wrong with being gay? Is there anything wrong with, two women? And then they just move it in slowly. They pick at it. And they do this process over 20 years. He says it takes 20 years to go through this full process. And when you do that, he's like, you got 3 generations roughly. You've touched 3 generations in this 20 years. And so it's demoralize, destabilize, create a crisis, and then normalize. And destabilization, he's like, it just takes like a couple years to destabilize something. Right. It's like after you got demoralization, destabilization means nothing works for you anymore. And so there's nothing that you can trust in any kind of way. And then the last thing is, because of that, you have a crisis. And so you create a crisis. And so when you have a crisis, what do you cry out for? A savior.
Yeah.
When you cry out for the savior to fix all the problems, he comes in with a new normal and he normalizes the whole process to this new world. And he can the way you know it, where it's going. And this is something that I've learned from you, Jason. You know the way it's going because of the moral imagination that's been shaped in the beginning. You know the way it's going because of the cosmology that they bring to a situation at the very start. You can already figure out what normalization is going to be. It's not going to be that hard to figure it out if you understand how this whole thing works. And so going after Disney in that time, in that era, they were, and he said in 1984, he's like denormalization, demoralization has already happened. Demoralization has already happened in America. He's like, and the KGB would have never thought it would have been so magnificent as it is. It's like, whoa.
And what's incredible about it is when you look back and you see what was subsidized, like that, what kind of immorality was subsidized and art was subsidized because it couldn't make money on its own. That's how you realize that's where the work was done, right? Because work that reflects people's system back to them will make money, right? You have to subsidize something that is purposefully trying to undo what's going on, and that is where you have the university system has done a lot of the subsidization, or has been the means of subsidization of things that nobody wants, but that erode the moral imagination of the people. But people don't want it. But so you have to subsidize it, right? Because in a capitalist system, people want things that
it's valuable to them, right? Like
that are valuable to them, that add value to their lives. Yeah.
Okay, so to work with that, because this is what we were talking about last night, that after watching Disney and his fight, so he created the MPA, the Motion Picture Association, and that group was designed to go after communists inside of Hollywood. And you had John Wayne a part of it. You had Ronald Reagan, who was a part of it. You had a lot of other filmmakers at the time and authors that were a part of this whole group. They start seeing and they start finding there's this huge panel that was done by, I can't remember who was it, Congress?
Congress puts together because the McCarthy trials are going on at the same time in Congress. So you've got the McCarthy trials combined with the the MPA trying to find within. It's a crazy story. Take half a step back, because you've got the MPA is forming and saying, hey, there's some communists here in Hollywood. We got to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they were right. It was true. They were onto something. There's a really funny movie that the Coen brothers just made with George Clooney about the communist and it's like about the communist infiltration of Hollywood in the 60s. It's hilarious. So you have the communist infiltration happening and the MPA being formed to put a stop to it. You also have the McCarthy trials going on. And since the Verona papers have come out and shown what was actually going on in the U.S. from the USSR side, we now know that McCarthy was right. 97% of the people that he accused of communism were actually receiving orders from the USSR. So there were people sending communist spies in, giving them orders. There was a real actual communist conspiracy. McCarthy was putting his finger on it. They had cracked the code for the communication between the USSR and its spies, but they didn't want anyone to know. So they had just a couple of folks that knew the code that were constantly intercepting the transmissions and decoding them. But because they couldn't just come out and say we cracked the code or they'd changed the code, they had to they started using the communists being identified within Hollywood as a way to get to the real communists that were actually causing problems within the government. So they would go in and say, give us names, right? And they would give us some names, and they would say, okay, go to those people, give us names, until they found the one that they knew was a real communist that they actually wanted, so that they could get to him. And it looked like they were stumbling their way into the right people, so that they wouldn't change the secret code that they were using, which they didn't. The USSR used the same secret code until it fell. And so we had cracked that code and were basically reading all of their secret messages all that entire time. We finally ended up using our own spies to go in and destable the ruble, so that the economics of the USSR were revealed to be basically on sand and not real, so that Gorbachev would come to the table and talk. Right? We ended up, but we knew what they were doing, but we couldn't admit it, and so we had to catch their spies, quote unquote, on accident using the MPA. It's a brilliant. The Blacklisted by History is the book that walks it all through. I mean, McCarthy was a national hero, like Nixon, right? But we weren't ready to
Nixon?
admit it. And the media has gone after them over and over and over to try and basically sully their name and convince us that we should all look at them like enemies and heroes. But really, they were effectively fighting communism.
Blacklisted by History.
The communists had just infiltrated the media to the point that they could make McCarthy out to be the bad guy, and they still do it. I mean, they'll still, every once in a while, Hollywood will make let's remind ourselves how bad of a person McCarthy was. I mean, it wasn't that long, and those movies all lose money because they're not good; they're just propaganda. But Jim Carrey made one, and they make them regularly. Just try and remind us McCarthy was bad, blacklisting people for, none of them were real communists. There wasn't a single communist in Hollywood. Those people are silly.
That was the thing. So going back and watching there was a couple things that were interesting. It was because communism was such a thing that people, there was one of the guys in as the Congress is going through their trial or their conversation with people, bring them to the table. One guy says, I'm tempted to move to Texas because I'm pretty sure that if a communist was to admit they were communists in Texas, that at least they'd shoot them. So there's a sentiment against communism that the culture had, and it wasn't a nice one. So that communists would not ever actually admit to being communists publicly. Right. It was a hidden behind, they were in the closet. And so you couldn't get them. They weren't as easily identifiable, where now we actually have a senator, a representative who is a communist. And he's fine, saying that he's fine with that. He's fine with communism. And he's actually, in the place in America where we can make law. That's ridiculous. That wouldn't have never been the case back in the day. So my point is this. It seems like Walt Disney, before I say this, the way the communists worked, where they would use people who wanted to achieve a particular goal, like social justice warriors, or other people inside of the labor unions who didn't have the money because people were still had a different kind of worldview and imagination. They didn't have any access to funds to be able to move their movement. The communists would give them money. And these guys would use communist money to help bring about communist ideas through their movements and not know what they were doing, or knew what they were doing but didn't care. Because they would thought, Yuri Bezmenov says that they thought that when this was all over and when this ended, they would be at the top of the food chain and they would be the ones in charge. But the truth is that the communists would kill them. The communists would get them out as soon as they were able to actually implement any sort of real power, because those kind of people were the ones who would always end up fighting them at the end of the day, because they thought that they would be in power. So the communists had to get rid of them. So they didn't know they were signing their own death warrants. But my point is this. Why was it that if storytelling, which is what Walt Disney did, has so much power and is able to influence such a culture, why didn't it stand the test of time for Disney? Because Walt fought with the stories that he was making at the time. You talked about this a couple shows ago. It was the Jungle Book was one of the ones, last one that he worked on, that he made to push against the was it communism?
To push against the what he saw as the destruction of the American family that communism was.
Yeah, so Disney is spending its time making stories of men coming to rescue women, princes, knights, damsels in distress, men rising up to come basically kill the dragon. This lovely, beautiful story. But this story since the beginning of time, and that's what Disney starts telling a lot of these type of stories, and that communicated that. But as soon as Walt dies, he was able to have some victory against the communists. But it doesn't seem like that's in his day. But it didn't stand the test of time, it seems.
Well, a big part of it was because communists had already won the education system, right? Because they realized.
It was a double. Go ahead.
Yeah, so they were fighting. They had a head start on him, right? They had realized what we need is to be the one training the next generation of teachers. So they went after the seminaries, they went after the teachers' colleges, they went after the university system, and said, give that a couple of generations. If we're the ones that are training the teachers, then they'll teach the next generation the cosmology that we want. And most of the time, what happened, because McCarthy didn't have the support, the broad support that he should have had, most of the people that got kicked out of the government for being caught as a communist spy were hired in universities, right? So they went over and became teachers of the next generation of teachers. So they got that it was a long game. By the time Walt Disney realized what was going on, it was a last stand situation. And America at this point, as we're finishing up Germany, we're bringing over their scientists
and they're teaching and helping us, get to the moon, right?
Right. Yeah.
We got a lot of them inside of our institutions as well.
Yeah. And so the breakdown of I was just watching a Thomas Sowell, an old Thomas Sowell video where he talks about, he just gives the statistics of before welfare, after welfare on the strength of the black family. Right. And he says the black family survived slavery. It survived Jim Crow. It survived all of this. What it didn't survive was welfare. Right. And and I had seen it before, but it still shocks me every time. Right. And the reason I was looking at it was I was looking at worldwide statistics of single parenthood, and we're leading the way right now on single parenthood. So in the world, that's not a statistic you want to lead the way in. So the family system was breaking down, and Walt Disney was trying to put a finger in the dike to keep it from breaking, but nobody showed up in the morning, which is what makes that story of the Dutch boy that finds a hole in the dike and puts his finger in the morning. People show up to help and fix it. Nobody showed up to help Walt Disney. He screamed and yelled, "Hey, there's a hole." Then there wasn't anybody to backfill.
It's funny. You're saying something that's making me think everybody now, and this is weird because I haven't seen this over the last 15 years, but everybody now is saying, oh man, we got to start telling stories. All the conservatives now have moved from, hey, we got to have our own storytelling institution. The Daily Wire is making their own movies now. They're still pretty woke, and like they have no idea what they're doing with it, but they're at least making them, right?
But hopefully they get better every time and figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no. I don't think they can get better every time unless their cosmology changes. Their cosmology is rooted.
I'm trying to be hopeful and
no. I say it again. No, don't be hopeful, because the thing is, I don't want people to put their money into things that share cosmology with liberalism and leftism.
Yes.
And if you share the same cosmology, you can hope for is all you want for a good ending. But we've already known from Walt Disney, if your cosmology is broken, you're only going to go one way. And so,
but there are folks over there that are moving in the right direction at the Daily Wire, right?
Yes, but they're going to come into conflict.
Did I send you the Russell Brand interview with Ben Shapiro?
You've told me about it.
It's so good. Russell Brand is a great interviewer. I think he's one of the best out there right now.
Thanks.
Thanks. You're welcome. There's very little I agree with him about.
He is fantastic.
Conclusions, but he's so skilled as an interviewer. He gets Ben Shapiro to explain things about Ben Shapiro that should shock Christians into saying, wait a second, is he on our side or not? He might not be on our side. Not because he's not a conservative, because I think he is. He's not like a secret woke liberal or something, but he is an Enlightenment Jew after the order of Maimonides, who was an Enlightenment Jewish philosopher along the lines of Kant, or he's kind of the Jewish secularizer, right? So now that we have accepted the Enlightenment cosmology, what does Judaism look like, right? So you can look at him and say, oh, because that's kind of what Kant is doing. Now that we understand what kind of modern the Enlightenment cosmos, can we rescue Christianity? And Kant gives a version, a very destructive version of a post-Enlightenment Christianity. So proto-liberal theologian, something like that. So and Shapiro points to the Jewish version of that and says, that's where I sit. Right? So, which we should look at him and say, oh man, you might be co-belligerent against things like trans tyranny, but we're not fighting for the same thing.
No.
If that makes sense. I've heard him on plenty of Christian shows, and none of them got to that root the way Russell Brand did. And
no, we had him on our show.
And I think he's a good dude trying to do well, trying to do good, but he doesn't have the cosmological underpinnings that point his feet in the same direction our feet are pointed at. We're in the same place because we're crossing past one another.
I think Russell Brand is naturally gifted with curiosity, where a lot of us really aren't. You know, we don't care. We just need people to hear us. But so we got there because of the storytelling and why I don't think that they're going to get it unless there's a cosmological shift inside of the Daily Wire, mainly from up top. Just watching the film that they've put out already and watching the films that they have put out, even from the documentaries, there isn't a cosmology that there isn't a cosmology forward at all. Right. It's only a cosmology that slow drifts that way. And it shows from some of the movements that they're making, even with the people that they're trying to create this big tent setup that has a reciprocal feedback to the very thing that they're fighting against. Right. And so I'm excited. Go ahead.
Well, I think that's why they're good at pointing out hypocrisy, but not good at pointing out how it ought to be.
But they're trying. And so
absolutely.
I have a lot of respect for them trying. And even with the Razor brand, they're like, man, we got to have our own stuff. We got to have our own brands, because we're getting canceled. But and Christians are looking at it and they're like, man, we need to be doing stuff like that too. And I'm thinking to myself, like, you need to be creating goods and services that are valuable and worth something to people, not creating goods and services that are subpar or just as good as a form of virtue signaling. Right. You got to create something that's valuable.
It's just us living in response. Then that's what we do. And that's why we lose over and over. Right.
And Jason, part of the thing that drives me nuts is I'm levels removed from being able to compete on that stage yet. Right. I know. And it's and I think we have this conversation privately, how like, man, we are just slowly getting there, but we have to build this thing right if we want people to bite on it, right? If we want to create the movies and the stories, the poetry, we have to get this thing right. And so I want to get to this. The thing that Walt Disney did, he was too late because he didn't have a full-fledged approach. And this is why I was bringing up with the Daily Wire. While they are making these films and doing this, the thing that they're not building is the foundation to undergird their films. If they were going the right direction and all that stuff was all things being equal, they don't have an educational system that is doing the moralizing so that the stories and the cosmology come together at the same time. And they got this top down, bottom up approach, right? To grab this thing. And so what Walt Disney was missing was the educational institute that was already infiltrated. He thought that maybe that was there, but it wasn't. The communists had already had that, and they were already working in it, so that by the time he's like, these stories should resonate, they're not resonating the way they need to. And the illiteracy, that's another part of this. If he's doing things that are, when you broke down Jungle Book for me, I don't know how many people, and this is so weird, even understood the depth of this or how stories work or what they're supposed to do. And how many people actually had an effect on, because they didn't have a cosmology for it to work. Right. Now, I know the stories still are supposed to do what they're supposed to do because that's what stories do.
Right. They do. They still do work. But we don't think deeply. I mean, a lot of people have watched The Office, right? Which is really well written and well done, and it's funny, and we remember the jokes and things. But the level of thought that is put into even a show like that that a lot of people think is like, oh, they're like making up jokes as they go along. They aren't. There's just really good actors. There's almost nothing in there that's not written in advance. But the level of detail to the thought and storytelling that they put into it is to the point where if you watch the interviews, the head interviews that they cut in and out of, it's really well done. The characters that don't have hope that they'll ever get out, they do all of those interviews facing in towards the building. Any character that has hope that they'll get out, they do their interview in front of a window facing out. Right. And so when you meet Pam, all of her interviews are inward facing. When her and Jim get together, they switch where they do the interviews to their outward facing, right? Because her whole life has been changed by which man she's receiving love from. Her entire view of the world has been shifted when she switches from being loved by Roy to being loved by Jim. Right? She has been freed from an internal prison. They are thinking that deeply about their characters to the point where which direction they point the camera is changed by the internal state of the character. They're thinking all that deeply. Christians, we go and we ask, what is not in it? Can I watch it based on what is not in it? That's how deeply we think about storytelling. And so there's an end run being done, and we have no, their linebackers are coming in, and we forgot to bring in a tight end. There's this deep illiteracy in the church that comes from our pulpits, it comes from our seminaries, to tell you the truth. But it comes, and then our pulpits are illiterate, and then they're the ones that are supposed to be telling us what's in the text. And then we don't ever learn to read. So the problem is deep, and it's a multi-generational solution to the problem. And then what we do is we just give up. We say, and some of that's our eschatology causes us to give up. We have an eschatology that tells us there's no hope, and so then we act like there's no hope.
Well, and
we don't do the work.
Well, part of it is that part of the reason we have no hope is because we really do see the death, right? So when you look at it and you're like, oh, that's a long way down to start from, and they're already up there. How do I get up there from all the way down here from starting? And so I think part of what we do is we start grasping at that point and say the only way to get up there to that point is to take it from them, right?
Right.
Trying to start,
when we look around and we're like, what am I doing in this pine box? And then we freak because we don't believe God raises the dead.
Right.
when we find it. But a big part of it is a cosmology that is a zero-sum understanding of the world, right? That if the only way for us to get some is to take it from somebody else, and then we have to, then it becomes a straight up fight for what there is. We can't build. We can't say, oh shoot, we need a cathedral. Who knows how to do concrete? Does anybody know how to do concrete? Let's start there. Let's pour some concrete. And then the next generation can frame, and the next generation then can decorate, right? So we don't think that way because we think somebody took the only building there is, we better go take it back.
It makes me think, Jason, that we probably need to be a lot more patient with Christian films then. Now, I know that people are making a horrible Christian film. I get that. Yeah. But we probably should have a lot
with Christian films as long as they improve. And some of, their filmmaking, I think the Kendrick brothers have improved over time, right?
Oh, yeah.
You look at it and you say, oh, their movies are better than they used to be. Keep at it. And Alex Kendrick in a interview recently, he's like, look, we're ordained pastors. Our job is to preach. And so I understand we're making sermon illustrations. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. He gets
Yeah.
it. He knows
Yeah.
exactly what he's doing. Then he says, we need filmmakers that are not pastors, that are not making sermon illustrations also. Right. So
Yeah.
he understands. I think they're doing a good job, getting better every time. And I think the Irwin brothers are also improving. I don't know if they're quite as self-aware as the Kendrick brothers, but they're improving in their craft, and that's great.
Yeah.
And there are young Christian filmmakers too that are coming in and they're saying, okay, I'm got to get started, and you want them to get better and better and better. I mean, that's one of the reasons I got involved in lore, was the to be able to fund the young filmmakers that are going to someday be great. Get them started with their feet pointing in the right direction.
I just think about the fact that, if you're going to learn how to use your staff, you're going to be out in the wilderness like Moses was. It's 40 years to learn how to wrangle sheep and walk in sheep poo and get it all in his toes. And then with a staff, how to grab them and hit them and bring them into, submission. And then, he had a lot of practice with that staff before he ever brought it before Pharaoh. And he didn't even know what God was doing until God called him. He's like, well, what's in your hand? That's what you're going to liberate. That's what you're going to liberate my people with, what's in your hand.
Yeah.
And this whole time he's been using it and practicing with it and didn't know that was going to be the thing. But he's getting better with it, and he's practicing with it over and over, day in, day out, and so there's a part of me that has a lot more grace for Christian filmmakers. The thing that I think needs to undergird that, we need to have them developing those skills, but we also need to be thinking about what is it that's forming their worldview. So, I mean, and that's just kind of the stuff that you're talking about with Walt. He saw storytelling as a way to fight against communism.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
and
as a way to, I think as a way to hold the line against communism.
So not even really,
not even really like take back ground, because I don't think he even thought it would be possible to take back ground at that point. But he was trying to hold the line, but he didn't end up surrounded by other people that said, "Okay, now there's enough of us. Let's charge back." Yet, I mean, honestly, now we're getting to that point. And so, and a lot of those seeds were sown by Walt Disney, right? He sowed seeds that are really just coming to fruition now. And they have, at different times, they've come to fruition. The problem is communist institutions know which smaller institutions to buy, right? They purchased Pixar. When Pixar picked up,
they're gonna be a problem. They're gonna be a problem. Yeah. We go.
So there's and that's something that I think we definitely don't understand the economics of cultural warfare at all. And communists have studied it. So they're using our capitalism better than we are. Although they had lost a lot of money on Strange World. That was terrible.
So one of the things that I asked you, like when we were talking about this, it was like, okay, he put a finger in the dam. Nobody came because they had the education system. And, one of the things that we were talking about is just like, okay, how do you, where do you start? Where do you fight back? How do you take a people who are illiterate, use the tools to help form their moral imagination to become literate, and then to start engaging and fighting back, and not just, when I think of it, man, there's so many things I want to say. Let me start here. I was asking you about Lord of the Rings, the new one on, what's the new title? The Rings of Power. And I was like, so what was your take on it? And and you told me, you said everybody is missing it because they're concerned about the world of orcs or hobbits and everything like that. And they're missing the idea that Tolkien hated egalitarianism.
Yeah.
And that's what made him write the story. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm just fascinated with this world. He hated egalitarianism and wanted to point out how bad it was for the society and the world. And so he wrote a story around that, and everybody is jumping around whether or not the characters are properly written in.
Right.
And the reason that they're missing is because of the foundation of why he wrote it.
Right. He egalitarianism, he saw it as an assault on reality. Right. And he hated it. He just fundamentally hated it because it was an assault on reality. Right. Because you can't glory in reality anymore if you have to flatten it. Right. that you're going to steamroll nature in order to form it into the what you want it to be, and you can't enjoy it anymore. You can't glory in it, anything like that. And I think that's that egalitarianism is the great enemy of joy, the great enemy of being able to rejoice in the Lord and embrace him as a king, and embrace the world that you find and find the good and the beauty and the truth in it, because you're going to impose coercively. You're going to have to impose egalitarianism coercively because you don't find it in reality. So he went after it in literature and has done a lot to form the moral imagination. I mean, in John Milton, when Satan shows up to try and begin tempting Adam and Eve, he looks at Adam and Eve and he decides that the first thing that he needs to do is to show up in Eve's dream and form her imagination to the point where disobedience is even a possibility. So it begins. So the first attack that Satan has is an attack on the imagination of Eve. Because there's no way to get her to so there's no way to just straight up get her to go disobey. So this is in book 5. So in book 4 is when he actually goes into her dream. But in book 5, you have this beautiful opening of book 5.
I'm getting it. Okay, go ahead. I'll catch it.
Okay. Now morn, her rosy steps in the eastern clime advancing, sowed the earth with orient pearl. When Adam waked, so customed for his sleep was airy light from pure digestion bred, and temperate vapors bland, which the only sound of leaves and fuming rills Aurora's fan lightly dispersed, and the shrill matin song of birds on every bough. So much the more his wonder was to find unwakened Eve, with tresses discomposed and glowing cheek, as through unquiet rest he on his side, leaning half raised with looks of cordial love, hung over her enamored, and beheld beauty, whether waking or asleep shot forth peculiar graces. Right, so Adam wakes up and he slept really well because there's no sin yet, and so his body still works great. So he wakes up feeling completely rested, and he rolls over up onto his elbow and he sees Eve with her hair kind of a little bit messy because she's been asleep, and her beauty strikes him and opens him up to the grace of God, right? A peculiar kind of grace that we learn in book 8 he hadn't experienced until he saw Eve, right? And so then with voice mild, as with Zephyrus on Flora breathes, her hand soft touching, whispered thus, awake, my fairest, my espoused, my latest found, heaven's last best gift, my ever new delight. Awake, the morning shines and the fresh field calls us. We lose the prime to mark how spring our tended plants, how blows the citron grove, what drops the myrrh and what the balmy reed, how nature paints her colors, how the bee sits on the bloom extracting liquid sweet. Now, when I teach this with high schoolers, I always say, ladies, and they go, oh. Like, what if a husband that just is enamored with me that much, he wants to wake me up because he's like, hey, it's a beautiful morning. You want to go experience it with me? Right there. It's like this beautiful love. But now he's receiving grace by her presence, right? And a grace but he can't wait to show her the beautiful morning and experience together. And so he wakes her up, and it says, such whispering waked her, but with startled eye on Adam, whom embracing, thus she spake. So she kind of jolts awake and grabs Adam, and he says, what's going on? And if you look over at about line 50, says, and she starts telling him about this dream. And as I wondering looked, beside it stood one shaped and winged like one of those from heaven, by us often seen, right? An angel with dewy locks, distilled ambrosia. On that tree he also gazed. So she says in her dream, an angel shows up at the tree that he told her not to eat at. That Adam said, God told us we can't eat there. O fair plant, said he, the angel, with fruit surcharged, deigns none to ease thy load and taste thy sweet. Nor God nor man is knowledge so despised. So this is the beginning of the lie. Or envy, or what reserve forbids to taste? Forbid who will, none shall from me withhold longer thy offered good. Why else set here? Right? So he says, why is it that we were told that you can't eat this? Is it because God doesn't want us to know something good? Or is it because God's envious of you, Eve? Right? And that's the lie that he sneaks in. It says, said he, paused not, but with venturous arm he plucked, he tasted. Me, damp horror, chilled at such bold words, vouched with a deed so bold. But he thus overjoyed, O fruit divine, sweet of thyself, but much more sweet thus cropped, forbidden here it seemed, as only fit for gods, yet able to make gods of men. Right? So the devil goes after Eve's imagination first in a dream, and by faking an angel coming and saying, God doesn't want you to have this kind of knowledge because he's envious of you, Eve. And then he eats it and nothing bad happens. And she says, oh, this fruit might make gods of men, right? Might be. So the lie begins in her imagination, but it terrifies her when she first experiences it. So she wakes up, and then Adam doesn't do a good job of guarding his wife, and they separate, and the fall ends up happening. But that it begins at what so I mean, Paradise Lost is a fantasy. He doesn't think he's telling us what really happened, right? He writes a fantasy novel, a kind of a historical fantasy novel where about the Garden of Eden. But he does so in a way to try and help us recognize the kinds of lies we tell ourselves and that the devil tells us. So it begins with a series of speeches from demons, and it's all the different ways that we convince ourselves that we should be able to be God, right? That people, and so we should be the ones in charge and not God. And as you're reading all the different demons give their speeches, the number of times, for me at least, that you go, oh yeah, this one's making a lot of sense. Wait a second, this is the devil talking, or this is Mammon talking, or Beelzebub. Like, this is a bad guy. But I've had that same thought. He's showing that that the way our imagination is formed leads us to the way we act. Right? Our self-justifications of our sins all begin in the imagination, and you wouldn't sin if you didn't already have a bent imagination. And so the devil goes after Eve through her imagination to begin with, to even make space for the possibility, right? Because most people like that suicide commercial, most people don't think, wow, suicide could be really a good option, a beautiful thing. Right? And then you watch that commercial and they try to make suicide beautiful. Right? They try to show you that suicide can be beautiful. Now, they don't show her dead body rotting. They don't show her corpse. They don't show the realities of it. What they show is all of the things that she imagines and tells us that death is going to be like. I remember talking to a guy who jumped off of a bridge, and and to try and kill himself, and he lived. And he said, it only took about half a second to realize I had made the wrong choice. Right? He stepped off the bridge. He had convinced himself it was the right choice. Half a second in, he was like, oops, wrong choice. And then he had broke both legs, but he lived. And so if you told the story just up till that point, and then panned away to a beautiful geese flying away, and then had music and that made you feel like this guy made the right choice, you could make suicide in the imagination of the watcher into something that began to feel beautiful. That's what they're trying to do, because it's not in reality, right? It's actually a horrific thing. If you just tell the story from the perspective of the people that got left behind by the person that killed themselves, then it makes you not want to commit suicide, because you see how ugly it is. And that's one of the responsibilities of art and poetry, is to show us how ugly sin is, to show us how ugly death is, that we should flee it. And Milton is trying to show the ways that sin and lies make themselves, or trick us into thinking they're beautiful when they're actually not, and then trying to give us a beautiful understanding of the way that reality is supposed to be, right? Book 8 is one of my favorite sections. I think book 8 in Paradise Lost is my favorite. He has this great section where Raphael, the angel Raphael, is talking with Adam.
Not the Ninja Turtle?
Not the Ninja Turtle. No, the angel.
Okay.
He's talking with Adam, and Adam, asks him some questions and talks a little bit about Eve, and then he says, to ask, this is line 66, to ask or search, I blame thee not, for heaven is as the book of God before thee set, wherein to read his wondrous works and learn his seasons, hours or days or months or years. This to attain, whether heaven move or earth, is not important if thou reckon right. The rest from man or angel the great architect did wisely conceal, and not divulge his secrets to be scanned by them who ought rather admire. Right now, so he's living through the Copernican revolution, and Milton is the best educated person in the English language, has read every book available, and he has he's reading the different tracts as they come out about whether or not the Earth is the center, or the sun is the center of the solar system. And he says, it's not actually that important, right? It's just he says, if you don't know how to rejoice and admire in your smallness compared to what God made, right? Your place in the universe. If you can't rejoice in accepting your place in the universe, if you can't rejoice in the beauty of this system that you don't control, then it doesn't matter if the earth is the center or the sun is the center. You miss out on the most important part of what it is. So he goes on and he says, if they list to try conjecture, he, his fabric of the heavens, has left to their disputes, perhaps to move his laughter at their quaint opinions wide hereafter, when they come to model heaven and calculate the stars, how they will wield the mighty frame, how build, unbuild, contrive to save the appearances, how gird the sphere with centric and eccentric, scribbled o'er cycle and epicycle, orb in orb, after all thy reasoning, this I guess, who art to lead thy offspring, and supposest that bodies bright and greater should not serve the less not bright, nor heaven such journeys run, earth sitting still when she alone receives the benefit. So it's this where he says, look, if you can, he says, why is it that God made you so small and then the universe so big, and then you so curious about how it works? He says, maybe it's because he's going to laugh, right? He wants to laugh at all the different things we can, all of our cosmological conjectures about the nature of things and how it works. Right? He said, because you can't actually get to the point where you look up and you say, I've plumbed the depths of the nature of things, and I've got my head wrapped around the universe. Let me explain it to you all. He said, what we do is we come up with theories that he says save the appearances, which is it's a phrase from Plato that Aristotle and then Aquinas and Kant and Owen Barfield all pick up and use along the way to talk about the scientific mindset, which you're trying to describe what's going on in a way that you can predict the what's going to happen, right? That's what science is trying to do. And he says the best we can do is include as much of the phenomena, as much of the appearance that we can into our description of it. He says, but we can't actually plumb to the depths of the nature of reality. We haven't been given that ability. We are a part of this universe. We can't get objectively above it and look down and describe it all. We can only see it from our perspective and try to say, well, here's my theory, right? Here's my hypothesis. And then other people come along and say, oh yeah, that matches all of the appearances. Everything that I see fits into that. Okay, we can work with that as long as it predicts something, right? He understands the place of science is limited, but he says, but if you lose your ability to rejoice and admire God's work as a work of art, he says, then it's all useless to you anyway, right? That the point of it is to be able to rejoice and then raise your kids well in it, right? That's what he says right there in the middle of it, right? Is to be able to raise your kids well and have wisdom to live well in the world that God made, and not to be able to look at it objectively, understand it, and be the God of the system.
It's funny, as you're talking about that, I was thinking of is it Peter Jones' oneism, twoism? Yeah. I was thinking about that. Part of what we feel like we have to do, and it's because the cosmology that I think we're under, is we think we have to be able to have the same perspective as God in order to be able to have understanding from God, right? Because and so what I mean by that is, if we don't see it in total like God sees it, from the area he sees it, the position he sees it, then we can't have enjoyment of it. And it's like, no. You are part of the created order. Right? You're part. So your perspective is not outside of the creative order. It's inside of the creative order.
Here's one of the things that, go ahead.
With the lovely Father giving you nuggets of information to see it in total, right? But it's not because you are in the same place. You're in a different place.
When you ask people to picture Earth, almost everybody now that you talk to, instead of looking down and picturing the place where they stand or picturing the dirt that they've actually experienced, they will have a picture in their imagination in which they are standing not on the planet, looking at it from the outside. The number of people that have actually seen the Earth from that perspective is is functionally zero, mathematically zero, right? There's like, 12 people in the entire planet that have seen it from that perspective. That is the perspective that we all have in our imagination, though. So rather than saying, rather than our picture of our home being from our perspective, our picture of our home is from a perspective that almost nobody has experienced. It's a very strange phenomena. Because if you ask
It's like
somebody in the Middle
experiencing
Ages,
music. It's like the
yeah,
same
exactly,
experience.
right? If you ask somebody in the Middle Ages, what's Earth like, they're going to tell you how it smells, how it feels in their hands. They're going to tell you that what it looks like, from the places they've actually seen it. They're not going to tell you it's a giant blue sphere that, from the outside. They're going to give you their own perspective. We have lost the ability to have our own perspective.
So Jason, go ahead.
So it's crazy. That's why, so when he goes on to describe his wife later in this chapter, and it's really amazing. What were you going to say?
What you just said is connecting so much. You said we have lost the ability to have our own perspective. That's exactly where we started from with all of this. It wasn't intended at all. It's like we don't have our own perspective on things anymore. And so this is why misinformation, the way that they have told you to think with COVID, the way that they tell you to think about ideas, men or women too, man can get pregnant. It's all that is tied together in the same way that they view the world. This perspective will give you the perspective that you need to have. Because
I had somebody tell me that they were from LA, and I said, "Oh yeah, how are things down there?" Right in the middle of COVID, and I said, "Oh yeah, I said it's pretty good up here. I mean, we're close enough to Idaho that there's still places you can go that are open. So we've been going over to Idaho for restaurants and stuff." And the person said, "Idaho, I heard the bodies are like piling up in the streets up there." Like,
oh, yeah.
What?
Yeah, for some sense.
The death rate's so high that the bodies are like piling up in the streets because they're not shutting anything down. I was like, no, that's not true. And they're like,
No,
well,
they did not believe that.
I was like, they did. I said, they said, how do you know? I said, I've been there. I was there 2 days ago. I've been to Idaho. It's not like that. And they're like, well, I don't know. That's what I heard. Like, they couldn't take the perspective of somebody from the space. They didn't know how to do that, right? And so it was very odd. This is why people are getting red pilled right now, because the ability, people think that the ability is universal this was now I can't remember where I read it. It was from somebody that had been in China under the communist regime there, and then they had escaped to America. They were talking about how one of the things that the Communist Party would do was they would say, today everybody is going to call the sky green. And if you wouldn't, you would get tortured. And they were like, what they said is they knew that the sky wasn't green, but it was a way of testing whether or not you were receiving your reality from their authority or not. And if you weren't, then you needed to be re-educated until you would receive reality from their definition and their authority. Right? That is the government trying to be God, obviously, but it's in that fundamentally in a world that has no inherent nature received by a creator. Then you're always going to be looking for an authority to tell you what reality is, right? So when you read somebody like Milton, who is saying we receive reality, and he talks about the nature of things a lot, the nature of things that they have received. I mean, the word universe, the second half of it, verse, comes from the same root word from a verse of poetry. Right? That the universe is it's a united poem because it's the word of God, right? It's created by the word of God. It receives its reality from God's word, right? And then the scriptures are also God's word, right? So God created with his word, and his word is the thing that gives reality to the universe. It gives the nature to the different things. When he speaks Eve into existence, Eve receives her reality, or she was Isha when she was made. Isha receives her reality, her nature, from what God says she is, because she's made of that word. Right? And so when Adam wakes up and looks at her, his responsibility to receive her by faith is to say the same things about her that God says. And when you have a marriage that's broken down into rivalry, what's one of the most difficult things is they start saying about one another, the husband and the wife say about one another things other than what God says about their spouse, right? Your job as a husband is to tell the wife who God says she is.
Ooh.
Right? Your job is to build her up with your words, to finish the construction project with your words that were begun with God's word, by saying the same words about her that God says she is, right? So when
this
a
is
marriage
not supposed to be a
down,
marriage counseling. This is not. I don't even know how you got. Talk about other stuff. Go ahead. That's good. That's good. Go ahead.
So I think that when you're dealing with people that are married and it's broken down, words can be so destructive because you're dealing with somebody made of words, right? When somebody's saying things about you that aren't true, right? Lies that are not what God says about you, it's really difficult to live in that environment, right? And you have to double down on visiting on spending time in the Word of God, because it will tell you who you really are, right? And there are times that you're in sin and you need to be told that. But the Word of God tells you in a building up way. And we need to speak to one another when we're in sin in a building up way, right? You come and you say, brother, sister, this is when you did that, it was a sin, it was destructive, and God has something else for you. God, there's a way to approach somebody in sin that they walk away saying thank you. Or, I mean, there are times I've been confronted by someone, and at the time been like, man, I don't see it. And then later you say, oh my gosh, you were totally right. And I knew I could go back to them and say, you were totally right. And they weren't going to condemn me. They were going to say, oh, I'm so glad, right? I want to build you up. I want to see you become who God has created you to be. And so you go back to them with the conviction, because they're a safe person to have conviction with.
Well,
there's other people that you go back to, and they're going to kick you when you're down, and you don't want to be that guy.
And part of the commandment, when you use the truth to beat someone up with, that's lying. That's not building that person up with words. The Westminster Confession of Faith actually talks about that. Using words as a weapon is to lie about that person. Because words when we use words, especially when we use God's word, or we use the truth is actually there to build someone up, to bring them to true humanity. That's what the truth does. And so when we use the truth, we shouldn't use the truth in a way to tear people down. And when we do that, we're using it improperly, and we're lying about God, and we're lying about the truth. And that's very problematic. We don't see that because our culture, our moral imagination say you use the truth to beat people over the head with it. And actually, this is why your book, Jason, book does not get enough praise on kindness. Your book on kindness is so, so, so important. And it's another Christian humanism book that's really quick to get through. But when you start going through that book, you realize that your disposition, or your position towards people, the way that you view them, if it is not to build them up with truth, to be careful with them, what does it look like for you should want somebody to come back to you and say, man, you were so patient with me, bro. Thank you for coming and telling me that. I didn't see it at the time, but it was your attitude of love that I was able to say, I can come back and repent, because it was so. And I think about that now. I'm like, am I talking to people in such a way that they can smell the aroma that I have of love for them, even in the rebuke, right? So that softens their ability to come back and repent, because you know it's going to be hard, but is there a way back, you know?
Yeah, that when the death arrives, do they say, I remember where I smelled resurrection? It was with that guy's word. Right. I want to go back there, because, and I remember, so one of my first pastors, I remember him talking about, the youth pastor. So I was a youth intern, and they had a very evangelistic youth group. And he said, one of the jobs of the youth pastor is to be the person that when that the youth call when they know they're in trouble, right? Like, you want to be the guy that when they say, I'm throwing up drunk, like, who should I talk to? Oh, I should probably call the youth pastor, right? It's like, so they were very evangelistically focused youth group.
I hope your kids call their father. So I hope you've been the kind of dad that's like.
But in an evangelistic youth group, one of the things that you find is you're not going after the you're not interacting with the kids that have Christian parents, right? So
wait a second. I don't know, Jason. It seems the way that Moses
that is the way. Can I say this? That's the way Baptist youth groups work, right? They go winning back other people's kids. But
the problem is that
this is a Presbyterian setting.
The problem is that we've all pushed our kids so far away that they all have to be evangelized, because no one is doing their job. I mean, one of the things
totally true.
And so that has to be a reality, because of the normative nature of a parenthood isn't there. Yeah.
And that's something that the church just needs to say, okay, ideally all of these people would go to their parents. What do the kids without parents do, though? Right. So there's a gentleman that I went to church with. He discipled me. He discipled a lot of my friends. He was middle-aged lawyer, never got married, never felt called to be married, and has spent his entire life discipling the young men in the church that didn't have dads. Probably 250 young men didn't have dads, but had this guy. And he just, every Sunday night, he had coffee and Bible study at his house with all of these, he called it guys group, all these young men that didn't have dads. And just for now, he's been doing it for 20 years. And the number of men that I've met here in my town who, when they say, well, the reason I am a functioning adult male raising kids in the faith is because of that man was my spiritual father, right? Hundreds
no doubt about it.
Yeah, right. So he's had more sons having not had any children. He's had more sons than most men will ever have. And so that's what the church does, right? That's when it's functioning well.
And that's when you know that your culture is broken, when the church has to have that type of functionality as operating in the sphere of family, which, praise God that we have that crutch there. But this is what we were talking about earlier, with the church also having to be judges. So the church, because of functioning society, is not functioning how it should. The church has to be operating with the civil magistrate to birth out of it new civil magistrates, and to be fathers to birth out of it new fathers, right?
Absolutely. Well, and that's
so
the thing that you see that this guy's ministry has done, right? As now you've got all these dads raising their kids, discipling them the way he discipled these young men, right? So you've got hundreds of grandkids following the Lord because he didn't have children but discipled all these men into fatherhood.
So I was, for the first time, man, this is a whole nother conversation. Our conversations get so good right towards the end. For the first time that I can remember, I couldn't, if you would have asked me before, I wouldn't be able to recall one scene, but I saw It's a Wonderful Life. So movie night at Shannon House, usually on Fridays. And so Black History Month, we do Black films. Christmas, we do Christmas films. And I'm trying to think of because of our family worship and we're going through Advent right now, up until this point, we've looked at the calendar very secular unintentionally. And so we haven't had thought of summertime as a Christmas season or a Christian season, right? We've thought of summertime as the time we don't do school, but we need to be thinking of the 5 festivals that are throughout half of the year. And so that we start looking at our calendar and at our time as people who are bought by Christ that see summertime as a Christian holiday or Christian seasons to think through and to be grateful for. But so we watched A Wonderful Life. And I just brought that up to toss that in there. And one of the things that was really interesting and stark watching it was in the beginning, the boy, there's this little blasphemy in there, but with the talking and Joseph and all that stuff, we were like, whoa. But the boy is reading a magazine, and in the magazine, there's like a problem there that the magazine brings up. And it's like, well, what does this mean? And at the bottom line, it was like, go ask your dad, because dad knows, and it was really interesting because just that alone tells you that the newspaper, the authors, knew that it wasn't their job to disciple children, whoever was reading the magazine. It was for fathers to instruct them on what this problem was in this issue, and dad would know the answer. I don't think anybody would really does that now. And it was really amazing. The only film that I thought that brought that kind of thinking to it, but it was very colored, was Mitchell's versus Machines.
Yep. Yeah. That was a great movie.
And they didn't do it. They did it accidentally, which is amazing. They didn't even know they looked at it and was like, this would make a great story. Because you can see I think the intention was to make that daughter a lesbian. Yeah.
They never totally really come out and say it, but it seems like that they are, but they're undercutting that.
They did. They did come out and say it.
Did they end up saying it?
At the very, very end, the cut scene.
Okay, I don't remember that. Oh, and a cut
they
scene.
were like,
okay, I didn't even.
I think
like a
it was a cut
scene.
Yeah, I think so, because they're like, I can't wait for you and Julie to come back for Thanksgiving or something like that. We can't wait to meet Julie or something like that.
Okay, I must have. I didn't.
They were hinting at it with the button. They were hinting at it with like she doesn't fit in, and
I was expecting it to manifest at some point, but they just kept going back to the dad being a stud, and all of them at the beginning were like, Dad, you're so silly. Yeah. And then he was right about everything. It was really great. And then the mom kind of flourished underneath him once she like accepted that he was right. Then she all of a sudden becomes this heroic character in her position as well. It's really a great movie. And it makes me wonder, did they add that other stuff in order because it came with the contract, which happens. Where it's like, hey, these are the requirements, to get this money, which happens, unfortunately. Well, it happens because communists understand how to use capitalism to destroy. So
to pick, I'll get you on that rampage in just a second.
I know.
How does I want to make sure this is clear, even for me though. How does Milton and understanding his poetry at that point, well, how is that? Because I asked you, it's like, what is the poetry to help you fight communism? And you're like, Milton. You didn't even flinch. Like, Milton. It was like, it's Milton. And I'm like, oh, it is Milton. Why Milton? Why is Milton the first person that popped into your head? Was like, okay, you want to fight communism, you want to do it with literature and poetry? Milton is the guy.
Yeah, because he makes egalitarianism beautiful. I'm not egalitarianism. He fights egalitarianism by showing that the opposite of egalitarianism. When
You talking about patriarchy, or yeah, I know you don't like that word.
Well, yeah, I don't like that. I like that word. I just don't like the way it's being used. But right, an ordered society where you've got authority, you've got heads and subjects within different covenants and within different authority structures.
Hierarchy.
Yeah, he makes hierarchy beautiful with his poetry, because he just embraces it and rejoices in it and is unashamed about it, right? Because he's not embarrassed by hierarchy.
So
and he's not.
Are you saying that communism wants to destroy hierarchy?
Yes,
it's egalitarian.
Communism it's a fundamentally egalitarian. So in the old communist regimes, the things that they wanted to get rid of were the church calendar, right? So they switched it to a 10-day week instead of a 7-day week. That sort of thing. They had to get rid of the church calendar in order to accomplish their goals, because they were trying to show people that they were not that freedom was a threat to their system. And then they got rid of distinctions, right? They wanted to egalitarianize everything. So they made everybody wear the same pants. Men, women, children, everybody had to wear the same pants. Right? Things like that. They transed it, yeah. But it wasn't. They weren't trying to say women are men now. They were trying to say there is no difference.
Right.
That there is. Yeah. So they wanted to get rid of any sort of hierarchical understanding of difference, egalitarianize everything. And what Milton does is unashamedly rejoices in the beauty of hierarchy, right? So within the angels, within the Trinity, within the relationship between Adam and Eve, he just rejoices, enjoys, and shows how beautiful hierarchy actually is when it's conformed to the realities of how God intended it, and is not an ontological hierarchy. It's all an economic hierarchy, and he just loves it, enjoys it. So this is Adam describing to Raphael when he first saw Eve. So Eve, heard me thus, and though divinely brought, yet innocence and virgin modesty, her virtue and the conscience and the consciousness of her worth, that would be wooed, and not unsought be won. Not obvious, not obtrusive, but retired, the more desirable. Or to say all, nature herself, though pure of sinful thought, wrought in her so that seeing me, she turned. Right? He says one of the most beautiful things about her is I had to win her. I had to go woo her. She didn't come thinking, oh, Adam, perfect. Here I am, right? Saw her and said, I don't know. I'm not even sure if I'm interested. Walks away, and he was like, it was beautiful. I had to go win and woo this woman, right? From the start, right? Without any sin involved, he rejoices in the fact that he still had to go. He had to stand up straight, become a man, go win her, go woo her. So that's not us. This is my favorite passage in the whole thing. I followed her. She, what was
Stalker.
honor knew, and with obsequious majesty approved my pleaded reason. To the nuptial bower, I led her blushing like the morn, all heaven and happy constellations on that hour shed in their selectest influence. Now, he still lives in a world where it's all connected, right? So he looks up and he sees the constellations and he says, this is all a part of our marriage story, right? Is what time of year is it? So he's basically noting the moment of what will become their anniversary, which is going to be marked by the stars, right? So a wife wanting you to remember her anniversary, that's not a problem, right? That's because there's a fundamental connectedness between you, your marriage, and the story of all of history, right? And so then he says, the earth gave sign of gratulation, and each hill, joyous the birds, fresh gales, and gentle airs whispered it to the woods. And from their wings flung odors from the spicy shrub disporting, till the amorous bird of night sung spousal, and bid haste the evening star on his hilltop to light the bridal lamp. Thus I have told thee all my state, and brought my story to the sum of earthly bliss, which I enjoy, and must confess in all things, else delight indeed. But such as used or not, works in the mind no change, nor vehement desire these delicacies. I mean of taste, sight, smell, herbs, fruits, and flowers, walks, and the melody of birds. But here, far otherwise, transported I behold, transported touch. Here passion first I felt, a commotion strange. In all enjoyments else superior and unmoved. Here only weak against the charm of beauty's powerful glance. Or nature failed in me, and left some part not proof enough such object to sustain, right? So he's describing his first encounter with Eve, and he realizes, I'm for more than this. There is not enough. This is the greatest moment, but nature has failed to provide everything for me, right? So he sees through Eve, he sees a window to what he's created for ultimately, which is beyond what's here in this moment. But it's in the embracing of the joy of this new experience of being in love, of the love being returned by Eve, and then the consummation of it. He realizes the limitations, because it's the greatest moment, is beyond what he could have imagined, that God provided to him. And it makes him think, there must be something beyond nature that is my ultimate fulfillment, right? He realizes I must be made for God, because it's really amazing. And this is where he says, in all these enjoyments else superior and unmoved, here only weak against the charms of beauty's powerful glance. Or nature failed in me, and left some part not proof enough such object to sustain. Or from my side subducting, right, from his rib, took perhaps more than enough, at least on her bestowed too much of ornament, in outward show elaborate, of inward less exact. For well I understood in the prime end of nature, her the inferior, in the mind and inward faculties, which most excel, in outward also her resembling less his image, who made both, and less expressing the character of that dominion given over other creatures. He says, and as I think about it, she was pulled from my side. She was created incredibly beautiful. I'm the one that God has already taught things. She doesn't know any of them yet. Then he says, and she's not strong. She's weak. She can't force her dominion on the creatures around her the way I can, right? So he's realizing, he's seeing the differences by being created first and being taught directly by God. He's going to have to teach her not to eat of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. He's going to have to teach her how to garden, because God taught him those things directly, but didn't teach her directly. And she's smaller, weaker, not as strong. She can't force her will on other creatures the way he can, right? He sees the differences between, and then he says, yet when I approach her loveliness so absolute, she seems in and of her, in herself complete, so well to know her own, that what she wills to do or say seems wisest, virtuous, discreetest, and best. Right? He says, but as I got to know her, I realized she was a well of wisdom. Right? So I was stronger, but in her was this well of wisdom that God had given me. Now, remember, he has to go get her. He has to woo her. And then he has to teach her how to garden. Because God taught him directly. He has to teach her what to not eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. God taught her that directly. She doesn't know those things yet. And she's not as strong as him. But she is a world in herself and a well of wisdom, right, that he has to go plumb the depths of. It's an embrace of hierarchy and a glorying in hierarchy, and showing the beauty of hierarchy. And there's not anything that does that now. I mean, I think the patriarchal movement has not yet figured out how to make hierarchy beautiful and desirable. They know that it makes leftists mad, but they have not yet said, let me show you why it's so beautiful, why it's so glorious.
They take the function of it without the heart of it. And they don't, I don't think they're intending to do that. Some of them do, and others don't, but I think that's the majority of them are saying and here's the reason, is because we know, and we see the fight of the left to destroy the institution. And when we see that, and the reason the left wants to destroy the institution, because inherent in the institution, particularly that of marriage, is the beauty of it. And the beauty of that institution brings the love for all the things that we experience in human nature as it relates to individuals' relationships with each other. All of that comes from the institution of marriage. And so we see them want to go after the institution. And so what we do is become very institutionalized in defending it.
And we live in response, right? We say we should protect this thing because they want to destroy it. And that's our reason. But we actually don't even know what the thing is. Now, I think they're right to want to protect it. That's why. But I think that the protection of it, it's like the sacraments. It's actually protecting us. We're not protecting it when it's functioning properly. I think marriage is beautiful, and it protects us when we embrace it and enjoy it. Whereas, when we simply, feel like we need to protect it, things that are dead rot. Things that are alive don't rot. And so when we feel like we need to protect it from rot, we end up sort of mummifying it rather than actually protecting it.
Jason, I wrote down something during the election time, and I started thinking about it a lot more. And the reason I wrote it down was because it seemed like everything that we were using in our culture and society that we want to work, we don't have the access to truth about it to know that it's working for us. So we don't have real access to the election stuff to be able to say that this was fair, that this was honest. We don't, our government is covered and shrouded by so many different layers of filth. It's hard for us to dig through it honestly and to know what's true and what's false. The social media platforms we operate with to communicate, they're hiding stuff from us. And so we don't know what's working. We just don't know what's working for us in society. And it came to me that, so then when you don't know what's working for you, you got to go back to the basis of what actually works and work those things. And the thing that hit me was marriage works, and you don't need a government. You don't need your state. You don't need anybody else but a covenant agreement between two people before God in the presence of others to make that work. And we know no matter what happens, rain, sleet, snow, come and go of economy, we know that marriage works. So work it. Like, work what you know that works. Children, they are arrows. They work.
Yeah.
Raise
them.
Yeah.
And I think this is where that difficulty is. We don't know how to have our own perspective.
Well,
we need statistics to tell us that marriage is good, rather than being able to look at our marriage and saying, no, what do you mean? How would you question if this is good for society or not? Why do you need statistics to convince you that a mom and a dad loving each other, raising kids is the best thing for kids? We shouldn't need statistics, but we have so separated ourselves from our own perspective right? We are ghosts haunting our own lives rather than living them. And we need to just start loving our spouse.
Exactly. We don't, so I said all that to say, we don't need to spend all of our time trying to understand what in the world egalitarianism is.
Yeah.
We need to have rightly ordered loves in the institutions that God has given us that work, that don't need some approval from the federal government or anybody else or any of the social media experience. To know we need to have such a love for God and for the institution of marriage and our wives and our children, so that we create out of that the society that has the impact on the world, and we protect those things. I have become far more upset than I've ever been out of watching men dress up like women and call themselves women. At first it was like, oh, that's gross. But then as I begin to think about this more, this is beyond gross. This is an all-out affront to destroy the very beautiful nature of women. And I love my wife. I love her dearly. And because I love her, I am not willing to tolerate that in any form. And
it's like, I just saw streamer Gothix. She's a Twitch streamer. She was talking about she was saying she's a black woman streamer, and she was watching a guy dress up like a girl, and she said, I feel about this way the same way I do about blackface.
Finally people are saying that.
Right. Yeah. She was like, this is a man dressing like a woman. This is the same thing about blackface that makes me upset. I feel about watching this right now. Right? And people are freaking out, right? They don't like it. And then other people are like, I know, right? Like, you're saying out loud what I'm experiencing too. This is just blackface for
I've been saying
women.
that for years. Yeah.
You have been, right. Yeah. But
I'm so happy to hear it out there.
Right. And I think as a black woman saying it, she can say, this feels like an affront in the same way that blackface feels like an affront. And people say, okay, I feel that way watching it too, where you just think, you have no idea the depths of femininity that my wife brings that you can never bring.
Ever.
Doesn't matter how long you wear a dress, because a dress is not the thing that gives my wife the glory and the wisdom of her femininity.
And there is right now, and because of Kanye West, there's this huge push to acknowledge that the realities of the Holocaust and they acknowledge the struggle of the Jewish people, and to not demonize them, and to make sure that we as a culture and a society do not belittle the fight that they had with Hitler and in Germany, and that people in no way by anyone should be treated in that kind of manner. And we reject that as a society, and it's an affront. And there's this massive push by everybody. I don't know what just happened to the back of my camera. Whatever, I guess it just died on me. But there's this huge push to make sure that society knows that we don't play about that. That's that's off limits. Just so you know, if you deny the Holocaust, if you deny the nature of a human being to be, and the fact that they should never be treated and enslaved like that and killed like that, and be in any way by Hitler and taken over, that is absolutely wrong. And if you do that, we will reject you as a society. And I'm saying to myself, what about the very nature of a woman? If it's wrong to deny the Holocaust and to deny the nature of a human being, to be treated like humans and not to be gathered around and put in containment camps and killed, if that's wrong, then how much more wrong is it to deny the very nature of a woman and the value that she brings to humanity? and to mock it and act as if it's something that you can just put on and take off.
And I mean you don't get there without first devaluing the fact that she brings babies into the world, right?
Right.
Abortion is just as much an attack on womanhood as anything else. To say like that's not actually an incredibly valuable human thing, a human person in your womb, and that your womb is not something to be protected at all costs, because it is. It should be something that is a protected space, but we don't. We value power. We don't value glory, beauty, wisdom.
I think I'm taking this Christmas season to spend a little more extra. I'm trying to dig. Maybe we'll have this for another time, but I'll end with this. Really trying to focus this Christmas season on making a better Shannon household. Like just going everything I can to, develop that, create those loves, and asking God for help to do that. Because I want my kids to love the beauties of our family because of the glory of God. I want them to see God has given us such a wonderful thing. And I want their associations to everything in this world built around the covenant blessings of God in this family, right? I want them to see the beauties of God through what we have in our home. And one of the things that I've noticed is how inept I am to do that. Right? Like I'm still called to do it, but it's like looking at it and being like, oh my goodness, like we talked about earlier with that drop, like where do we start from, And the truth is you just got to start, and you just got to, you don't even think about how far of the chasm is you just got to start. And because I'm able to look and see in truth how illiterate I am, the things that I don't have in place, the history that I'm still learning. For the first time, I told my wife, I talked to her last night. I said, for the first time, babe, in my 40 years on earth, I've been able to look at what I was trying to grasp and understand in the first 40 years of my life and where I missed it at. And this is the first time in my life where I feel like, not just feel, where I know I get to map out the next 10 years of my life to say, what kind of man do you want to be? If God gives me another 10 years and I live to be 50, I am intentionally saying, okay, this is the type of man that I want to be in the next 10 years, because I know how time works now in a way that I didn't know before. I know how people work. I have an understanding about the world. And I am going to intentionally map out the kind of human being that I want raising my kids and families and grandkids. I want to make sure by the help of God that I build that type of man in my disciplines, in my thinking, in my operation, in my loving. I feel like now I'm capable of thinking this through enough to build that type of human being. And as I hope that I can teach my children now to think in that and say, okay, daddy's been here. Let me help you craft out the next 10 years of your life. Right. So you can not waste trying to figure out 30, 40 years of how to craft it. I'm gonna help you craft this type of human being here's the things you're going to need to put in your toolbox to be this type of human. And this helped me understand why men who think like this are probably at the peak of their life in their 50s, because men sometimes are a little slower. I think we need to get to the workforce a lot faster. I think delaying men getting to the workforce delays their ability to think like this, because some men now probably won't think like this until they're 50 or 60, because of the way that we're maybe even later than that, because of the way we're raising them. But I think we need to get men working as soon as possible as we can to give them education and train and work same time. I think it's super important. But because now when you hit a certain age, you hit 50, the kind of person that you've created between 40 and 50 has experience and knowledge and, what he can do and what he understands and how to operate makes him super efficient and effective in the next 30 years of his life, if God gives him that. But particularly from his 50s to his 60s, he can accomplish a massive amount of benefit for the kingdom and for his family just by his understanding. It's going to be super hard for him to do that without arrows, though. And that's the other side of this. It's like, if you don't have children, to be able to have the kind of impact and effect that you need to have at about the age of 50, at least right now in today's culture, it was a lot sooner previous cultures. But to have all that knowledge and all that wisdom, to accumulate that without arrows to shoot in particular places. And if you haven't been discipling your arrows so that they're effective by the time you hit a certain age, then the very thing that you're trying to fight with politics and building these underground movements, and that stuff ain't going to hold up, because you don't have the people that have been discipled in a particular type of way to be effective in cultures and society. We are at the place where we need to replenish every aspect of our society with Christian culture, Christian-minded people who love beauty, love life, love God, and then are willing to fight for it with their own hands to the death, and you don't get that apart from a love for something. And right now, my biggest fear is that we're building our love around our nation. And because we're building our love around our nation instead of around God, we'll lose our nation because the love is misplaced. If you build your love around the things of God and the institutions that God has given us, then what you'll get is a great nation. And you'll have people want to fight for their nation because the nation is submissive to God and the family is undergirding that thing, and it's not at the top, it's at the bottom. And so anyway, that's random, but it was just one of the things that out of all this, even hearing you talk about Milton and the love for the family and the hate for egalitarianism, it's like we need to learn to love things better.
Yeah.
And that generates a natural disgust for the things that are opposed to this true reality, And
it undercuts the rivalry that the world is trying to grow up between us, right?
Yeah.
Trying to grow up a rivalry between men and women, trying to grow up a rivalry between blacks and whites, trying to grow up a rivalry. And it undercuts that rivalry because that's rivalry depends upon egalitarianism.
That's good, Jason. Yeah, because then, Walt Disney said, hey, listen, I believe in my company, because there was a lot of rivalries there, and people were asking, why does he get the front parking spot, and why does he get to be here, and why does he get to sit there? And he's like, listen, I believe that anyone who works hard and gives their best and they succeed should be praised for that and should be honored for that. And if you work hard and you do those things, you will have the front parking space, and you will have, and I don't have a problem. I'm not a respecter of person, but if you don't like that, he didn't say it like this, but he basically said, if you don't like the meritocracy environment that we're in, you don't have to be here. But we work based off of that environment. And so the hierarchy here is designed where you work hard, you get blessed. You don't work hard, you stay there, and that's, that's all of that hierarchy. They didn't like the hierarchy. And so because you have broken families that are just littered all throughout there, and so those loves aren't placed properly. Anyway, I'll let you have last word.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's the reality is created by God as something that is actually beautiful, right? And trying to make death beautiful, like we saw in that opening commercial, that's the enemy of all of this, right? You're trying to say the enemy, we can embrace the enemy in a beautiful way. Death is the enemy of reality. Death is the principle that is now degrading reality around us, that we as people empowered by the resurrecting spirit of God have the resurrection power of the spirit in our lives. We're fighting that death. We're rolling it back. We're the ones that push against it, so that there's a space for the beauty of reality to flourish. And we have just lost sight of the importance of beauty and just finding the reality beautiful, admiring reality, enjoying, and and cultivating it so that other people around us can also enjoy it. So we've lost the vision, and need to restore it in us and in our kids and in our churches.
One of the things that I think I said I'm gonna give you last week. The reason that this is such a long Knox Unplugged is because you didn't get 2 hours last week.
Right.
And
yeah.
you might get some, we might be off a
it.
little bit for Christmas. And so I'm just going to let it roll. But part of, what did you just, I said that and I'm totally lost my train of thought. Maybe it's time for us to go. You had just, what did you just say at the end of that?
That we're cultivating a space for reality to be beautiful.
Yeah, I lost the train of thought, but maybe there's time. If that leaves, then it's just like, let's end. Yeah, I totally lost it. Oh well, God didn't want me to say it. I guess there's been enough said already. It's like, hey, next time let's talk about calendars. I think I've been fascinated with I was reading Doug's God Rest Ye Merry, and I've read it before, but everything hits different after, man, since we've been talking and since I've been out in Moscow 8 years, 9 years, going on 9 years, it's taken that long for my moral imagination to be adjusted. Oh, that's what I was going to say. It's taken that long for our moral imagination to be adjusted. But one of the things that's happened in this, when you've lost so much and you have to gain so much ground back, and the task is super, super daunting, and it is. And I'm telling you, as somebody who's been through it and is still going through it, it's amazing to see, though, how much restoration God brings back and how fast you're able to get traction.
Yeah.
And so it's not like, we'll never get there to that amount of time. So what's the point in trying? No, it's what does it look like for people to repent and start engaging? And in the process of engaging, what if God doubles our efforts? What if God triples our efforts? What if God lets us catch up in 15 years and we are on the top and the whole world looks different because of a little bit of faithfulness? And that's one of the things that people don't miss about with faith is like death and resurrection is impossible. Resurrection is impossible. And God does it. Right?
God does it all the time.
He does it all the time. And one of the things that I've seen is like, if you're reading your Bible and you're going through Chronicles and you see the destruction of Israel and these people are coming back and everything's fallen and they got their enemies on top of them, about to take them over, the first thing they do is restore worship and they repent. And as they're sitting there praising and praying and repenting to God, he sends a force of angels to protect them and then to give them the spoils of their enemy so that they can rebuild. And it's not like whatever slave mentality that Israel had that they had to get off of them in the desert, they didn't leave out of Egypt broke.
Right.
They left with the money to be able to build a nation because God had given them the spoils of their enemies. And so we need to remember that when we're starting over, when we're starting again, we're trying to get this foundation, especially for people who are trying to get these disciplines of family worship. And, oh man, I do need to get married. I'm running late on this. Do it. Just do it and have faith in God. And they used to say a word, see if God won't do something radical with you. You know what I mean? I used to love the old folks that see if God won't work on your behalf. I love that kind of language.
Well, and I think that when it comes to it, getting traction has to do with friction, and the climbing things that aren't real. It's really hard to get friction. But as soon as you find reality and you start to climb, it's like, oh man, I'm making headway suddenly because I'm connecting my feet with reality. And there's a lot of friction there. There's a lot of friction there at the same time. You find friction real quick. But when you're connected with reality, you make progress.
So I'm going to do something because I know you need this, because just to encourage you, Jason, I feel like from time to time you need encouragement. Because I think, and here's why, and I'm gonna say this, but I think that when you have already been in the library for 20 years, seeing that there's a problem with Christianity, and you go in there and you come out and you're like, all right, let's fix the world. Oh my goodness, these people are stupid as all get out. Where do you start from? Right. Like, you know, I think there's been a challenge there for you to be like, how do we do this? And part of my argument with you is like, man, we're doing it. But it is moving slow, and we're not getting to the place we want. We want to be able to tell stories. You're working with lore, you're working with sound stages. We're actually practicing what we're trying to do, but we still, it's hard to get our people to want to jump on board. And there's a small sect of people who understand, but we have to build people up to get them to see just how important things are. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to ask people, this is like well into our show. No, 7 people are probably listening right now at this point, and that's totally fine. Listen, if you're trying to figure out, if you listen to our podcast and you're like, oh, you know what, this is a long show, just take it in bites, take it every 30 minutes, turn it off and come back. It's not like you have to charge through everything when you turn it on. Although those people who do, salute to you. But I would love, Jason, what's the email that people could reach you at?
Jason@lore.tv.
I would love for people this Christmas, if you wanted to give us a Christmas present, I would love for people who have been listening to Knox Unplugged to send Jason an email. And here's what I want you to write in the email. If you could, where you were at when you started listening to Knox Unplugged and where you are now, and if Knox Unplugged with Jason Farley has been a blessing to you, how? And I think the reason I want to do that is because I have been extremely blessed from our conversations, and I was getting extremely blessed from our conversations before we ever started doing Knox Unplugged, just calling you and talking to you. This is our normal conversation on the phone, literally like 2.5 hours.
Yep.
And it's not hard to do that, and we'll be all over the place. And so I just finally said, you know, let's just record these and let's just put them out. So, and whatever, but we've seen a lot of people listening, but we don't always hear from a lot of people. And so the first thing I want is I want you guys to send Jason an encouraging email for Christmas to encourage his brother, and just let him know kind of where you started and where you're at and kind of how it's been a blessing, and or just to say, hi, I listen and I'm very grateful for you guys. That's one thing. And the other thing is, if you listen, it is a huge blessing to us that you share the show. Like if you are on through the app, on Twitter, you got our Twitter tags, or at least mine. Jason didn't put his up.
I don't really go on Twitter or
yeah.
social media at all.
I know it seems simple, but just to share it carries a lot of equity, and it gets the show out there. We don't spend time promoting the show. We just do the show because this would be a normal conversation anyway. And yet it's grown exponentially. And it's really weird that this is, you know, we don't try, and God's blessed it. But I would like for this as a Christmas present for Knox Unplugged to encourage Jason with the email. And if you could share the show on one of your social media platforms, that would be a huge blessing to us. And an encouragement as well. So there, you didn't know I was going to do that, Jason. Ta-da.
No, I didn't. Yeah.
and you know, because I think since we're sitting here talking, the only person you see grow from this is me, and you're like, is anybody else? I don't care if nobody else. If you get like no emails, you know, I'll be like, I don't care. We still got to do it because I need it. Yeah. But I really do hope. I mean, sometimes you don't see them, the messages and stuff like that. But I really do hope that you know, like this is I spend a lot of time going through content, listening to content, engaging news and media. And this for me is probably, you know, one of the most effective things in my line of work is having these conversations. And I am so grateful for you and for the blessing that you are to me. And all of that, you know, whether it's on Whitlock's show and whether it's on Cross Politic or whether it's on another show that I might be on, all that in some way or another is you have impacted and shifted and sculpted that to help me see things and engage with the things that are important and valuable, instead of wasting my time on things that are not. Like, I love politics, but that, to really engage in politics is to be a father to my children and to have a wonderful dinner table that's full of joy and full of thanksgiving and full of love, and teaching my children to love God and to love their mom, right? And to love each other. And that is where we win politics at.
Right.
And I've always held it, but I'm seeing more and more how the details of what that looks like. And so this is so valuable for me. And anyway, I just, that, but I just wanted to tell you and do it over in the show. And I want everybody else to be able to do the same thing. So